There are women who are always labeled as too sensitive, too deep, too different from the rest of the world. You may be one of them, but if Carl Jung were still alive, he would look at you and say, "This is not a weakness. It is a sign of an invisible power awakening within you." There is one truth Jung left us: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. The moment you hear this, you may realize what you once believed to be destiny was actually emerging from a part of your soul that has not yet awakened. This video is not just something to listen to before falling asleep. This is a journey for you to gently step into the inner space where intuition, shadow, and light converge. You will begin to understand why you see what others overlook, why shallow conversations quickly drain you, why you can always feel the energy behind words. If you have ever asked yourself, "There is something within me greater than the life I am currently living," then today, and in the hour ahead, you will begin to touch it. The opening call: you are too deep, too sensitive, because you were chosen. There is a strange truth: the deeper, more sensitive, and more intuitive a woman is, the more she must learn how to live in a world that was not designed for her. From a young age, she has heard things like, "You're too sensitive," "Don't overthink," "Stop imagining so much," "Don't make things complicated." And each time she heard these words, she shrank herself a little more, tried to make herself a little more shallow, tried to live like the majority, just to avoid feeling out of place. But at some point in life, often during a period of solitude, crisis, or emotional upheaval, she begins to realize this sensitivity is not a flaw, but a spiritual antenna, a receptor for unseen information that others simply do not have. Carl Jung did not view sensitivity as weakness, but as a form of the soul's perceptive ability. When he said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes," he was not only speaking about introspection, but about those whose inner capacity is so large that they lose interest in the surface of life. They look through appearances, through motivations, through energy. The section, "The Opening Call." You are too deep, too sensitive, because you were chosen, strikes at a truth many women carry, but have never had acknowledged that their too muchness is actually a selection by the universe. A person can live a normal life only if their inner world is normal. But a vast soul, a sensitive soul, must walk depths that other souls cannot endure. Here, the opening text does not merely comfort, it restores inner dignity to the listener. It says, "You are sensitive not because you are weak, but because you are deep. You are hyper-aware, not because you are anxious, but because you see beyond the surface. You feel energies not because you imagine them, but because you operate on a more refined frequency." Jung believed that the unconscious contains energy fields that the conscious mind does not yet understand. When you feel that a sentence has a wrongness to it, when you sense that a room feels heavy, when you know someone is not sincere, even though they speak politely, that is not female intuition, that is unconscious perception at work. And Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." If a woman does not understand the source of her intuition, she will think it is anxiety. If she does not understand the source of her sensitivity, she will think it is insecurity. But once she understands, she realizes it is ancient instinct. It is the intelligence of the soul. In the opening text, the image of the woman who was chosen is not about special privilege, but about a special journey, the journey of living between the light of consciousness and the shadow of the unconscious, the journey of hearing whispers within oneself that others cannot hear. These women often feel like they both belong to the world and do not belong to it. They still work, still love, still engage socially, but they carry within them a deeper layer of perception, a kind of dual existing, one part living outside, one part living within. And the most important thing the opening text achieves is shifting sensitivity from being a problem to being a gift. Many women spend their whole lives trying to be less emotional, less deep, less sensitive in order to fit in. But when they shift direction, when they begin to ask, what if this is not a flaw? What if this is a sign? What if I was born to see deeper? The awakening begins. Jung described such people as souls carrying the energy of the self, the core of the psychological system where the conscious and unconscious can communicate. A person like this does not merely think with the mind, she knows with the entire body, in silence, through sensation. That is why, when the opening text says, "You were chosen," it is not flattery. It is an acknowledgement of a truth only those souls with a special inner assignment can bear the weight of heightened perception. An ordinary person will never feel too deep. An ordinary person will never feel too sensitive. An ordinary person will never feel pain from the invisible. But one who sees more will always feel more. And when the text says, "Those who walk between light and shadow, both blessed and isolated," it precisely captures the nature of the Jungian journey. Because one who perceives deeply cannot live carefree like the many. One who possesses strong intuition cannot perform social theater smoothly. One with a vast inner world struggles to find someone of equal depth to converse with. But accompanying that solitude is peace. Accompanying that sensitivity is gentle wisdom. Accompanying that quietness is invisible power. 2. The invisible power within. The woman begins the process of individuation. If part 1 was the calling, the first awakening, when a woman realizes that her sensitivity is not a burden, but a sign of a higher inner frequency, then part 2 is the shift from realization to embodiment. If in the previous part she asked, "Am I chosen?" then here, she begins to live as someone who was chosen, not through loud action, but through an inner shift of energy. Invisible power does not erupt like fireworks. It is like embers beneath ash, glowing, deep, steady, with no need for display. This woman, in Jung's understanding, is not someone who talks about spirituality as a trend, not someone who reads a few self-help books and declares herself awakened. No. She is someone who has walked through fire, has loved and lost, has trusted and shattered, has endured inner battles no one ever saw, and through that has learned one of Jung's deepest truths. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. It is pain that forges soft wisdom, not pretty moral slogans. She becomes still not because she is weak, but because she understands. She becomes quiet not because she cannot speak, but because she no longer needs to speak. She becomes present not through image, but through essence. And most importantly, she no longer lives to earn approval, no longer reshapes herself to please others, no longer shrinks herself to be more lovable, no longer makes herself small in relationships just to maintain harmony. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For this woman, that privilege arrives when she stops living to satisfy the persona and starts living from the self. Persona is the outer mask, the social face, the identity adjusted to be acceptable in the world. But the self is the center, the original pattern of being uncompressed by expectation, unshaped by outside molding. This journey Jung calls individuation, a long and sometimes lonely path. When the unconscious begins merging with the conscious, when the deeper layers of the soul begin communicating with the ego, the woman begins to become deeper, still, clearer, harder to manipulate. She no longer reacts, she observes, no longer fears abandonment. She knows she can stand alone, no longer struggles to be loved. She becomes someone who can love transparently. This freedom is not angry rebellion against society, but a withdrawal from the need for external validation, not because she despises the world, but because she sees through it. Not because she is cold, but because she no longer needs to perform. A clear sign of this state is her quiet, grounded, magnetic energy. Those who thrive on drama, on shallow excitement, on psychological chaos, often feel uneasy around her. Her peace acts like a mirror, not reflecting appearances, but reflecting essence. In many cases, she stops explaining herself because she has outgrown the need to be understood. She stops proving herself because she has outgrown the need to be right. And Jung once wrote something piercingly accurate. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. This woman, after walking through fire, no longer sees life with the eyes, but with the soul. She no longer sees people through their words, but through their energy. She no longer evaluates value by form, but by frequency. As she enters the individuation process, a woman often begins to pull her energy away from shallow conversations, half-hearted relationships, and soulless social interactions. Others may think she is distant, but in truth, she is simply preserving her energy for what is worthy of contact. This is also the stage where she realizes not everyone has the capacity to hold her depth, and that no longer hurts her. She no longer forces herself to change to be accepted, but allows herself to change for her own becoming. If part 1 is the moment the woman realizes she is different, then part 2 is the stage where she begins to live as someone different. This is not change from the outside inward, but from the inside outward. Like a flower that does not rush to bloom, yet nothing can prevent its blooming. And the most beautiful truth is this: her invisible power does not come from forcing herself to be strong, but from no longer forcing herself to be anything other than who she truly is. 3. The mark of meeting with the shadow. When she faces and embraces the darkness. If part 2 is the moment a woman begins living from the self instead of the persona, then part 3 is the step where she turns inward even deeper, facing the parts society once taught her to reject. Because once she becomes still enough to live in truth with herself, she becomes brave enough to look into the dark corners of her psyche that she once could not face. When she stops trying to be the perfect image, she finally has the courage to see her real self, both the beautiful and the wild, instinctual, raw, primal parts. This is the stage Jung called meeting with the shadow. It is not a pleasant encounter, not a mystical, sparkling revelation. It is a naked truth, sometimes sharply painful, the moment a woman realizes that what she once felt ashamed of, suppressed, or denied was always part of her. Jung stated clearly, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. She does not become mature by thinking only of beautiful things, but by being courageous enough to acknowledge the most uncomfortable truths within herself. She looks at her jealousy and no longer dismisses it as a bad emotion. She looks at her anger and no longer forces herself to appear gentle. She looks at her desire and no longer buries it in the darkness of guilt. She looks at her shame and no longer lets it define her worth. In that moment, a quiet transformation occurs. The parts that once manipulated her from the unconscious now become parts she can observe with consciousness. She realizes, I am not my emotions. I am the one who sees my emotions. And because of this, she is no longer easily led by guilt, no longer vulnerable to manipulation through shame, no longer controlled by the judgment of others. When someone tries to script an emotional narrative to dominate her, she no longer plays the role. She sees the attempt. She understands the mechanism, not through intellect, but through lived experience. In modern society, especially for women, there is an invisible pressure to be good, to be sweet, to be calm, to be not angry, to be not jealous, to be not desirous. But Jung saw human nature through another lens. He believed the shadow is not the evil part, but the part not yet integrated. Jung wrote, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The more a woman tries to deny her instinctual parts, the stronger her shadow grows, and the more it controls her from behind. But when she dares to look at it, it weakens. When she names it, it becomes part of awareness. And when she embraces it, it becomes fuel. Interestingly, it is precisely by facing her own darkness that she becomes calm in the face of others' darkness. When someone else shows jealousy, she does not get angry because she has seen that in herself. When someone else explodes, she is not afraid because she has survived storms within her own heart. When someone else tries to pull her into drama, she does not get sucked in because she knows what inner chaos feels like and has learned how to stand outside of it. She is no longer devoured by the energy of others because she is no longer afraid of the energy within herself. And here an important transformation unfolds. She no longer divides herself into good parts and bad parts, but sees wholeness. Because as Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But once she accepts herself with all the fragments once rejected, she enters a kind of inner freedom that few ever reach. She no longer needs to pretend to be happy, no longer needs to appear kinder than she truly feels, no longer needs to hide the fire inside her. Instead, she becomes authentic, raw, without spiritual makeup. This does not make her harsher, but deeper, not more indifferent, but more steady, not colder, but clearer. Around her, those who are accustomed to avoiding their own shadow may feel uncomfortable. Her presence is like a mirror, not reflecting the image they wish to see, but reflecting the parts they have rejected within themselves. But for those walking a similar path, she becomes a comfort, a whisper that says, "You are not alone in your inner battle." If part 2 is the maturation of self-sovereignty, then part 3 is the maturation of courage, the courage to look behind the light, into where the darkness lives. This woman understands that to become whole, she cannot choose only the beautiful parts of herself. She must choose also the wild, instinctual, imperfect, wounded parts. 4. Shadow integration. Entering the inner night and uncovering the gold in darkness. If part 3 is the moment a woman becomes brave enough to look at her shadow, then part 4 is the stage where she not only looks, but walks into that darkness. If seeing the shadow is the first step of recognition, then integrating the shadow integration is a deeper form of maturity, allowing the darkness to become a legitimate part of her psyche. Here, the woman begins the journey Jung called the night sea journey, the nocturnal voyage through the ocean of the soul. This is not a journey for the faint of heart, nor one that can be understood by those observing from the outside. During this time, she goes through long nights of anger, not anger at life, but anger at all the times she had to pretend. She walks through moments of deep hurt, realizing she abandoned herself just to keep others comfortable. She enters silent chambers where she cries until emptied, unseen by anyone, only to be reborn from within. This is the stage in which niceness is no longer the goal. Society trains women to be good, to be pleasant, to be agreeable, to be not too much, to be not demanding. But Jung did not believe in niceness. He believed in wholeness. And when a woman realizes that niceness is not the same as wholeness, she begins to tear away the moral costume society has placed upon her. She realizes that trying to be good by collective standards fragments the psyche, because to fit into those standards, she must amputate instinct, ambition, fire qualities that are legitimate expressions of life force. She begins to understand the fundamental Jungian truth: there is no fullness of light without an equal potential for darkness. Jung said, "The shadow is 90% pure gold." This is one of Jung's boldest statements because it redefines the entire relationship with the shadow. It is not psychological trash, not the worst part of the self, not something to be expelled. It is gold, raw gold, unrefined. In the feminine dimension, this goes even deeper, because throughout history, women were taught to deny qualities such as power, sexuality, ambition, self-determination, strength. the right to demand, the right to protect themselves, the right to say no. These qualities were labeled unfeminine, shameful, dangerous, and because they were shoved into shadow, they became distorted, turning into jealousy, possessiveness, emotional explosions, obsessive control. But when a woman dares to name them and bring them into the light, something miraculous happens. These qualities transform. Sexuality becomes subtle magnetism, the ability to unite body and soul. Ambition becomes clear direction and self-authority. Power becomes natural inner influence. Anger becomes healthy boundaries and self-protection. The shadow is not an enemy, but a reservoir of primal life energy. The woman in this stage understands that she does not need to destroy the shadow, she needs to integrate it. This integration makes her less judgmental, more compassionate, more instinctual, confident at the root, less driven to prove. Not because she has become enlightened, but because she has gone through her inner night and survived. This is the stage where others begin to feel she carries a kind of complete energy. This energy is not sterile purity, but transparent honesty, seasoned by history. It is not saintly politeness, but authentic wholeness. She no longer fears being misunderstood because she understands herself. She no longer fears judgment because she has seen every possible judgment already in her own mind. She no longer panics at chaos because she has swum through her own midnight sea, Jung wrote. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. In the awakened woman's mind, she begins to perceive this secret order. Emotional storms that once drowned her now become maps of inner terrain. Explosions that once made her fear herself now become profound understanding of human nature. She sees the chaos, but she also sees the cosmos. When her shadow is integrated, this woman no longer fractures under intense emotion, but stands firm like a tree with deep roots. She is no longer dragged by the psyche, but walks with it, leads it. And perhaps the greatest change is this: once she lived in the system of right versus wrong, but now she lives in the system of true versus untrue. She stops trying to be perfect. She stops trying to be agreeable. She stops trying to fit. Instead, she lives from the truth of her being. If part 3 is the moment she looks into the shadow, then part 4 is the moment she steps into it and returns with the gold within herself. This is the journey of a deep soul, unafraid of the inner night, because she knows that on the other side of that night lies another dawn that no one can take away. 5. Emotional alchemy, turning pain into intuition, into soft wisdom. If part 4 is the journey into the darkness and the discovery of raw gold within it, then part 5 is the moment the woman begins to melt that raw gold and refine it into a form of soft, subtle, profound wisdom. If during the night sea journey she faced the darkness of the soul, then in this stage, she sits with herself in the dim light of inner dawn, where darkness no longer threatens, but becomes material for understanding. One of the greatest transformations Jung recognized is this: emotion is not weakness, but the language of the unconscious. Jung wrote, "Emotion is the chief source of consciousness in society. Women are often taught to be ashamed of their emotions. Don't cry. Don't be too sensitive. Don't be angry. Don't be intense. Don't be weak. Don't be difficult. But Jung did not see emotion as disturbance, but as a doorway into the deeper layers of the psyche. Emotion is a signal from within. Here, the woman stops running from emotion. Instead of sedating her feelings, instead of muting her pain, instead of pretending to be fine, she begins to sit with it and ask, "What have you come to tell me? What are you trying to teach me about myself?" There are women who spend their youth escaping emotional responsibility, blaming parents, ex-lovers, society, circumstances. But eventually, when pain repeats as a pattern, when familiar wounds return again and again, a transformation occurs. She no longer blames the world. She turns inward, not because she blames herself, but because she understands that the root of suffering lies in the unacknowledged parts of herself. When she begins to listen to her pain, pain becomes a map. When she begins to understand her pain, pain becomes a teacher. And from this, a form of soft wisdom is born intuition. But not intuition as vague sensation. Intuition refined through hundreds of emotional experiences, hundreds of mistakes, hundreds of evolutions. This woman now has the ability to feel the energy underneath words. She can sense that something is off, even before the rational mind has time to analyze. She notices vibration, asymmetry, dissonance in the eyes, in the breathing, in the silence between sentences. This is not oversensitivity. This is the refined perception of a soul that has known pain. If before she thought my intuition must be wrong, now she knows. No, my soul knows what my conscious mind has yet to understand. But the most important growth in this stage, and it is a subtle but decisive evolution, is her ability to distinguish between intuition and trauma reaction. This is one of the most delicate and defining advancements. A reaction from the wound speaks with fear. True intuition speaks with calm. If a warning arises from panic, from abandonment anxiety, from fear of being hurt, that is the voice of trauma. But if the signal arises in stillness, without urgency, without distortion, that is intuition. In emotional alchemy, the woman learns to listen to the emotion, feel its origin, identify its meaning, transform it into understanding. What once hurt her now gives her understanding. What once wounded her now gives her subtlety. What once made her weak now gives her compassion for humanity. For only someone who has truly known pain can look upon others with eyes free of judgment. This is the stage where she becomes the kind of person Jung described so beautifully. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. She no longer needs psychological armor because she is familiar with her own vulnerability. She no longer needs fake strength because she understands that true strength comes from authenticity. She no longer needs to freeze the heart because she has learned not to let the heart dominate her. Her intuition is no longer a vague feeling but an invisible radar. Without reasoning, she knows. Without evidence, she sees. Without confirmation, she senses. Others may lie with words, but they cannot lie with energy. Emotional alchemy has turned her into someone who understands humans beyond language, beyond behavior, beyond surface. She does not just see what people do, she sees why they do it. She does not just hear words, she hears the wound behind the words. If Part 4 taught her courage to face the darkness, then Part 5 teaches her the wisdom to transform it. This is when she begins to see that every pain carries a message. Every tear carries a memory. Every wound carries a piece of herself she once abandoned. And this is also the stage where she becomes not only deep, but light. Not only strong, but soft. Not only conscious, but intuitive. This is emotional alchemy, where pain is not merely healed, but transformed into the light of awareness. 6. Releasing material attachment. Inner freedom. No longer governed by the persona. If Part 5 is the moment a woman learns to sit with her emotions, turning pain into soft wisdom, turning wounds into intuition, then Part 6 is when that wisdom opens the door further, releasing material attachments or freeing oneself from artificial identity structures. This is the moment she looks back at her life, at everything she once believed was herself, and realizes that it was merely the layered masks of the persona. If in the past she believed she was her beauty, was her sexual appeal, was her social status, was her achievements, was who loved or respected her, then, in this stage, a profound truth emerges. All of those things are fragile. Beauty fades, reputation shifts, money fluctuates, social position changes, relationships evolve. And if we equate ourselves with these things, we will always live in instability. This is where Jung saw clearly identity is not the persona. Identity is the self. Jung wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual." In Part 6, the woman begins to recognize this social mask and is no longer dependent on it. Interestingly, this liberation does not come from philosophical lectures, but often through loss, disillusionment, existential crisis. For example, when beauty is no longer an unquestionable advantage, when the relationship she believed was destiny dissolves, when job, title, or status is stripped away, when what she once proudly possessed disappears like smoke. That is when she confronts the question, who am I without those things? This question hurts, but it penetrates deeply, and it begins peeling away the layers of persona from her soul. As she releases attachment to the material, it is important to notice she does not become indifferent. She does not become negative. She does not reject life. On the contrary, she becomes free. She can still be beautiful, but no longer needs others to validate that beauty. She can still be successful, but no longer lets success define her worth. She can still be wealthy, but wealth is no longer the compass of her identity. She can still be loved, but not because she needs love to feel worthy of existence. A new spaciousness emerges. Life becomes simpler, but her inner depth expands. She begins to notice things she was once too busy clinging to material identity to perceive. The peace in a cup of tea, the value of a silent moment, the beauty of a morning ray of light, the depth of an honest conversation, the density of energy in a subtle touch. Everything begins to shift from material to symbolic, from form to meaning, from quantity to quality. If previously she sought her worth through external approval, now she finds it from within. Jung once reminded, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. And once she looks into her heart, she understands that what truly nourishes the soul never comes from the material world. A particular quality arises in the woman at this stage: non-competition. Not because she cannot compete, but because she sees competition as meaningless. She no longer needs to prove she is better. She no longer needs to win. She no longer needs to compare. And ironically, this lack of striving makes her far more magnetic than those desperately trying to impress. As she releases material attachment, she also releases emotional attachment, and thus, she is no longer easily manipulated by praise criticism, by love-hate, by acceptance-abandonment. She becomes like a boat that has pulled anchor from the harbor, no longer dragged by society's turbulent waves. This leads to an entirely new mode of living, a way of living gently, but not superficially, a way of living peacefully, but not passively, a way of living simply, but not emptily, a way of living meaningfully, but not ostentatiously. She does not need much, but she experiences profoundly. She does not demand grandeur, but touches the sacred within the ordinary. If previously her ego required material identity to feel complete, now her soul requires space, simplicity, and stillness. And that is true freedom, inner freedom. If part 5 is the maturation of emotion, then part 6 is the maturation of perception, when the woman understands that her true self does not reside in what she possesses, but in who she is. From this point forward, she steps into a life no longer shaped by persona, but guided by the self. 7. Awakening the healer. Archetype. From emotional victim to healer with boundaries. If part 6 is the moment a woman releases material attachment and realizes her true nature does not lie in what she possesses, then part 7 is when she realizes that this true nature also does not lie in what she gives. Because if in the previous part she stops defining herself through appearance, status, material, then in this part she stops defining herself through saving others. When the soul has been freed from the persona, it steps into a deeper stage, awakening the healer archetype. But this time, not the exhausted martyr healer, but the awakened healer with boundaries. This woman, from very early in life, has often been a sensitive heart, an empath able to feel the pain of others even when they try to hide it. Since youth, she has had the inclination to hold broken souls, to be a refuge for the wounded, to be an anchor for the lost, and she once believed that this was her mission, that she existed to heal others. But Jung saw a danger hidden in that light. He said the healer has to heal himself before he can heal others. In part 7, she begins to understand the depth of this. She realizes that healing is not absorbing all the pain of others into herself, not carrying their emotional karma, not becoming their savior, not dragging them upward with her own strength. She understands that if she carries too much of others' pain, she becomes a victim again. If she sacrifices excessively, she reenacts the martyr archetype. If she saves others instead of guiding them, she makes them weaker, not stronger. Jung reminded that in any light, there is always a region of shadow. There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. The light of the healer archetype, if not conscious, often falls into martyrdom, a woman so good that she destroys herself, a heart so kind that it becomes exhausted, a soul so loving that it erases its own boundaries. But in part 7, she begins to transform from wounded empath to conscious healer. There is a subtle yet crucial shift. She no longer empathizes to the point of hurting with others, but understands to the point of seeing the path they must walk themselves. She helps, but does not rescue. She supports, but does not carry. She understands, but does not absorb. She loves, but does not control. She connects, but does not dissolve herself into others. Even her presence when the soul is healed becomes healing. Here we see a simple but profound truth. Sometimes it is not advice that heals, but the space of energy she creates. Others feel they can breathe near her, be themselves, be fragile without being belittled, break without being judged. She does not try to save them, she simply is there, and that very presence is already a healing field. Jung said something deeply resonant. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This woman does not try to change others, but when others meet her energy, they transform on their own, not because she manipulates, but because they see themselves reflected in her clarity. And most importantly, she begins to understand that the greatest illness of the healer is not lack of love, but lack of boundaries. And so, she learns a new truth. Setting limits is not selfish, but self-respect. Saying no is not lack of love, but protection of love. Stepping back is not abandoning others, but returning them to their own journey. She understands that every soul must walk through its own night. No one can awaken in place of someone else. Jung once spoke of the loneliness of inner healing. Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. This woman understands that true healing is not what I do for you, but who I become before you. If part 6 teaches her freedom from the material world, then part 7 teaches her freedom from the savior role. This is the stage where she understands that she is not the one who holds up the world. She is simply a soul walking among souls, one who carries light but does not imprison herself in light, a healer who does not forget to heal herself. She becomes a mirror of wholeness, not perfect, but authentic, not saintly, but deep, not controlling, but quietly powerful. From here, she steps into the next stage of the Jungian journey, learning to love solitude, and understanding that the greatest place of healing is the quiet space within herself. 8. Loving solitude. alone but not lonely. Solitude as temple. If part 7 is when a woman awakens, the healer archetype, learning to help without saving, to love without controlling, to empathize without draining herself. Then, part 8 is when she realizes an even deeper truth. The greatest source of healing does not lie in interaction with others, but in the space she reserves for herself. When she stops playing the savior, she returns to the silent temple of her inner world, where the soul breathes, expands, and is reborn. Carl Jung once said loneliness is the beginning of all freedom, and he also recognized solitude as a fountain of healing, not as the absence of others, but as a return to the self. Ordinary people fear solitude because they fear confronting themselves. But a woman who has walked through her own darkness, integrated her shadow, understood her soul through pain and intuition, she no longer sees solitude as a threat, but as a homecoming. If once she feared silence, feared the night, feared the vast inner spaces, then at this stage, those very spaces become her sacred refuge. Being alone does not mean being lonely. Being alone does not mean being empty. Being alone does not mean being abandoned. Being alone means she chooses to withdraw from external noise, to hear the whispers within. She chooses to step away from pleasant but shallow gatherings, from conversations full of words but lacking soul, from relationships rich in interaction but poor in sincerity. She chooses quiet because in quiet, she finally hears her true tone. Jung once said an essential truth about awakening who looks outside. Dreams, who looks inside, awakes. When this woman enters solitude, she is looking inward, and that is awakening. Not mystical awakening, but an awakening where she notices what external noise once concealed. Alone she hears the voice of the self. Alone she knows what is unfolding within her, free from the interference of others' energies. Alone she senses the subtle field of energy she radiates. Alone she detects the movements of consciousness. Solitude becomes a kind of inner medicine, a living meditation, a state of centeredness. Because she honors her aloneness, her relationships begin to change as well. When she no longer fears loneliness, she no longer clings to people. When she is comfortable with silence, she no longer needs words to fill space. When she knows who she is in stillness, she no longer requires others to confirm her. Her relationships now become cleaner, less performative, less dependent, less controlling, less emotionally entangled. She chooses quality over quantity, connection over interaction, authenticity over social conformity. There is a special moment in this journey when she realizes that being in a room full of people and being unable to speak her truth, that is true loneliness. But being alone for hours, for days, and still feeling full, that is not loneliness, but inner freedom. Jung said, "The highest, most decisive experience of all is to be alone with oneself." In part 8, the woman attains this capacity, not because she has detached from the world, but because she has stopped dissolving into the world. Not because she rejects others, but because she refuses to dilute herself across countless superficial bonds. Her solitude becomes like a temple, a place where the soul enters and drops every remaining mask. In solitude, she is herself in the purest form. And from that solitude, her energy transforms. She no longer needs many words, no longer seeks sympathy, no longer asserts herself. She becomes someone whose presence itself becomes a language. If part 7 is the transformation from unconscious healer to conscious healer, then part 8 is the stage where she becomes the healer of herself before she can ever truly meet another soul. From here, the woman enters a form of inner maturation that few ever reach: a spiritual independence not cold, but complete, not isolated, but self-sovereign, not closed, but discerning. 9. The language of synchronicity. When the universe begins to answer through signs. If part 8 is the stage where a woman learns to return to the inner sanctuary, where silence becomes the condition for hearing herself, then part 9 is the moment when that silence opens a window of connection with the external world. When she has become quiet enough within, the universe begins to speak from outside. Carl Jung called this synchronicity one of his deepest concepts. He described it as a meaningful coincidence of two or more events for which the causal connection is not apparent, meaning those meaningful coincidences which cannot be explained by ordinary causality, yet resonate directly with the psychological life of an individual. In part 9, the woman enters the ability to read that language. There is a very subtle transitional moment. After months, maybe even years of living in inner stethoscope mode, she begins to notice that the events outside are no longer completely random. She hears a song at the exact line that mirrors the words in her chest. She unlocks her phone precisely as a quote appears, the same message she just wrote in her journal. She sees repeating numbers: 1111, 222, 333, like the heartbeat of the universe. She meets the right person at the right time, not earlier, not later. A casual sentence from a stranger turns out to be the answer she had been searching for all week. And the most important thing, she does not treat this as superstition. She does not live in delusion, does not think she is the center of all signs, does not inflate her identity. On the contrary, she receives these signals with gratitude and humility. Jung called this mode of being the symbolic life, to live by symbols. He once said, "The symbolic life is the only life worth living." This woman begins to live in that dimension. External events are no longer just events, but symbols. A sentence is no longer just a sentence, but a message. A meeting is no longer random, but the intersection of two spiritual trajectories. For her, every appearance has a reason. Every delay has a meaning. Every closed door is guidance. Every encounter is a puzzle piece in the map of life. And here we see a subtle harmony between psychology and mysticism. The universe does not control her, it converses with her. An interesting effect emerges in this process. In the early stages, she searches for signs. Later, she recognizes signs. But in the stage of spiritual maturity, she no longer needs signs. And this is the astonishing part: she herself becomes a sign for others. People gravitate toward her not necessarily because they know why, but because they feel something. She becomes a point of orientation, a kind of compass, a living bridge between the visible and the invisible. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And when someone encounters this woman, they change, not because she persuades, not because she preaches, not because she directs, but because something vibrates within them. She becomes living synchronicity, the embodiment of purposeful coincidence. Her energy is like a frequency. Those who share it recognize it. Those who do not pass by without noticing anything unusual." A crucial theme in this part is spiritual humility. This woman does not become an energy fantasist. She does not believe she is chosen above others. She does not treat synchronicity as a magic trick for her ego. She does not see herself as the universe's exclusive messenger. She understands what Jung himself realized: synchronicity is not a miracle for me, but a language the universe speaks to all who have opened the frequency to hear it. She does not demand signs. She does not manipulate signs. She does not force interpretations. She lets synchronicity appear naturally, like glowing pebbles along the path. She becomes someone who not only sees signs, but lives as a sign of serenity, awareness, connectedness, trust, non-resistance to the flow of life. If part 8 is inner silence, then part 9 is the dialogue between the personal soul and the soul of the universe. No longer a one-way relationship. I ask, the universe responds. I pray, the universe answers. Instead, a two-way relationship emerges. I listen. The universe suggests. I step, the universe opens. I shift frequency. The universe shifts appearance. I light the inner flame. The universe reflects that flame outward. 10. The death-rebirth cycle of the ego. The ego is not killed, but gently laid down. If part 9 is the moment when the woman begins to live in resonance with the universe, reading the language of synchronicity, and sensing the subtle guidance from the invisible dimension, then part 10 is the stage of the most powerful inner transformation, the psychological death-rebirth of the self-structure. This is where she does not merely listen to the soul, she changes the architecture of the I. This is when she begins to experience small psychological deaths, one by one, to make space for the birth of the self. Carl Jung once said something profoundly important, yet often misunderstood. The ego is not the master in its own house. The ego is not the ruler of itself, and certainly not the ruler of the soul. In part 10, this woman begins to experience a series of little ego deaths. The death of the need for approval. The death of the fear of abandonment. The death of the habit of abandoning herself to please others. The death of the urge to control how others perceive her. The death of the need to be right in every discussion. The death of the subtle competitive mindset against other women. The death of the impulse to prove her worth through external achievements. These deaths are not loud, not dramatic, not publicly visible. They unfold quietly, like each old ego cell dissolving. And the most important thing Jung emphasized, the goal, is not to kill the ego. Jung did not support any spiritual extremism that rejects the self-identity. He clearly stated, We should not pretend to be able to dispose of the ego. It is too valuable and too important. The ego is necessary. The ego is part of the psychological structure. It is the social identity, the shield of self-protection, the tool for navigating this world. The goal of individuation is not to destroy the ego, but to place it beneath the guidance of the self. This is the pivotal moment. Before, the ego was the driver steering her life through fear and desire. Now, the ego becomes the assistant so that the self, the deepest I, the soul core, the whole self can lead. If previously, the ego said, "I must be loved, I must be special, I must be right, I must be valuable in the eyes of others." Now the self whispers, "I already am love. I am already part of the whole. I do not need to be right. I need to be authentic. I do not need to be seen. I need to be myself." Here, she does not try to become spiritual. She does not pretend to be enlightened. She does not perform calmness. She does not deny the human emotions of anger, envy, fear, sadness. She allows the human part and the sacred part to sit at the same table. No rejection, no suppression, no inner exile. She realizes the sacred part needs the honesty of the human part to incarnate. The human part needs the compassion of the sacred part to be accepted. No more inner splitting, no more internal war, no more a higher self suppressing a lower self. Jung once said, "I would rather be whole than good." She understands this in her bones. The goal is not to become the good woman according to societal expectations, but to become a complete human being. Wholeness, meaning the recognition that she holds both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and wild instinct, selflessness and self-love. The result of this transformation is a completely different mode of presence. She moves through ordinary life, washing dishes, brushing her hair, sending emails, walking down the street. But her energy is deeper, calmer, more real. No spiritual slogans, no display of awakening, no announcing of enlightenment, no need to make others notice her growth. Her inner equilibrium is the evidence. Her lack of overreaction is the evidence. Her full presence in the moment is the evidence. Jung emphasized, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This woman, in part 10, is touching that privilege, no longer driven by the past, no longer defined by others, no longer led by fear, no longer manipulated by ego. She becomes herself, not a replica of anyone. If part 9 is the dialogue between the soul and the universe, then part 10 is the final reconciliation between soul and ego. This is the foundation for entering part 11, love and relationship, in a new form, loving without possession, without filling emptiness, without using another person as emotional anesthetic. 11. Love and relationship in a new form, emotional self-sovereignty, loving without possession. If part 10 is the stage where the woman lays down the ego and allows the self to lead, then part 11 is where she steps into one of the most delicate realms of human life, love. This is no longer love of the ego, love for validation, for filling emptiness, for soothing the fear of abandonment. This is the love of a soul that has matured within, the love of someone who knows she does not need anyone to complete her because she is already whole. There was a time when she loved as a form of survival. She loved to feel valuable, loved to feel less alone, loved to be seen, loved to be chosen. But Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And through past relationships, the disappointments, the letting go, the fractured heart she awakened, she realized that love born from depletion will only attract mirror relationships, ones that reflect the wound rather than heal it. Now, she no longer loves to fill a void. She loves from fullness. She loves from self-sufficiency. And when one is self-sufficient, love is no longer attachment, but free choice. A key dimension of Part 11 is emotional responsibility. She understands that every emotion inside her is something she must hold, not unload onto another. If she feels jealousy, she observes it. If she feels insecurity, she dialogues with it. If she needs reassurance, she stands with herself first, then articulates her needs outward. She understands her emotions are her responsibility. Their behavior is their responsibility. No merging, no confusion, no using her pain as justification to control another. Jung emphasized, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Thus, when someone touches an inner wound, she does not blame them. She looks at the scar within her own soul. The concept of forgiveness also shifts. She does not forgive in the way of I overlook everything. Do whatever you want to me. No longer the self-erasing forgiveness, the kind that turns her into an emotional container for someone else. For her, forgiveness is the release of stuck energy, the freeing of the soul from past entanglement, while still holding clear boundaries. Forgiveness is not you may re-enter my life whenever you wish. Forgiveness is I no longer carry that emotional burden. And here is the core of Part 11. Love becomes sacred, witnessing a deeply evolved form of loving. Instead of loving like I will change you, or I need you to become this version so I can feel safe. She loves like I see the sacredness in you, but you are still a free soul. She does not love to possess. She loves to see and to be seen. If previously, in love, she melted into the other, now she stands beside the other in the integrity of her wholeness. Something important happens. Her love is no longer the merging of two incomplete halves. No more of you are a half, and I am a half, together we become one. No. Now it is I am a full soul. You are a full soul. We meet not to fill absence, but to expand inner life within each other. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This woman, having accepted herself, can now accept others without needing to fix them. She does not seek the perfect man. She seeks the authentic man. Not a perfect love, but a love that is present. She understands that relationship is a meeting of two spiritual journeys, not two psychological cravings. And through this, something beautiful unfolds. The woman no longer loves with fear of loss. She loves with freedom. No more power games. Who cares more? Who needs whom more? Who misses first? No more energetic accounting. I gave you this much, you owe me that much. She loves like a flowing current without calculation. But she is not naive because the self is guiding. When the ego is laid down, love returns to its pure nature. Connection, recognition, respect, empathy, the intercourse of souls. She becomes someone who knows how to love without owning, how to bond without binding, how to accompany without losing herself. This is the love of a soul that has journeyed far facing the shadow, crossing the night sea of the soul, practicing emotional alchemy, releasing material attachment, stepping away from the savior role, entering solitude, learning the language of synchronicity, and laying the ego down. Only then does love become truly pristine. If part 10 is the reconciliation between soul and ego, then part 11 is the harmony between two souls. From here, the woman moves into the final stage of the Jungian journey, part 12. The self-recognizing feminine soul, wholeness beyond ego, where she becomes the living bridge between heaven and earth, between the finite and the infinite, between the human and the sacred. 12. The self-recognizing feminine soul, wholeness beyond ego, the woman as a bridge between heaven and earth. If part 11 was the moment when her love became mature, where two whole souls meet not to fill a void, but to resonate, then part 12 is where she enters existential wholeness, the state Jung regarded as the ultimate destination of the human psychological journey. Here, she is not merely facing herself, not merely healing herself, but becoming herself in the deepest way. This is the moment where the self is fully formed and steps into the central role of the inner life. Jung called the ultimate goal of this process individuation, a process he described as the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, that is, the separate, indivisible unity or whole. This is not about becoming a socially independent individual, but about becoming an integrated being where consciousness and unconsciousness, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, the human and the sacred, all have a seat within the inner house. In part 12, this woman has unified the anima animus within, intuition and intellect, softness and strength, receptivity and action, feeling and discernment, expansion and contraction. No more conflict between these psychic forces, no more inner war, no more battle between what the heart wants and what the mind allows. She no longer tries to be enlightened because she lives enlightenment. Jung wrote, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious." And this woman has done just that. She has walked into her own darkness. She has seen the buried parts of herself. She has embraced the rejected fragments. She has transformed the unconscious into consciousness. And now, the darkness no longer threatens her. She is not the woman without shadow. She is the woman who has made peace with her shadow. The beauty of part 12 is a return to ordinary life, but with new depth. This woman does not become a sage, withdrawing from the world, does not flee to the mountains, does not escape everyday life. There is nothing dramatically mystical here. Instead, She becomes a bridge between the unseen world and the ordinary world. Washing dishes becomes meditation. Walking becomes meditation. Sitting with tea becomes meditation. Watching a cloud drift by is enough to feel connection with the whole. She brings presence into the smallest rituals without ceremony. She brings sacredness into the simplest moments without ritual. Jung wrote, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality." This woman has entered that state. She is no longer a collection of fragmented parts, but an integrated whole. One important point: she no longer needs titles. No need to call herself a healer. No need to call herself a guru. No need to call herself a teacher, because her very presence is the teaching. When she enters a room, even in silence, people feel a field of calm, depth, and serenity. She does not try to change anyone, yet others change by encountering her. She does not try to teach anything, yet her life silently teaches. She does not try to be a model, yet she becomes one. This is the invisible influence of the soul with inner order, a kind of spiritual magnetism. The apex of Part 12 is the final realization, not a philosophical proclamation, not a doctrine, not a personal declaration, but a quiet illumination. I do not simply exist in the universe. The universe exists in me. This is the moment she realizes she is not separate from life. She is not a tiny creature trembling before the cosmic vastness. Her deepest self is no longer ego, but self unified with the whole. She understands. She is part of a hidden system of unfolding. She is a reflective fragment of the infinite. She is both the drop and the ocean. Jung said, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." In Part 12, this woman has become intimate with that other within. That is the self, the imprint of the whole in each individual. If in Part 1 she was simply a sensitive soul who felt different, in Part 2 she began the individuation. In Parts 3 and 4, she traversed the shadow. In Part 5, she practiced emotional alchemy. In Part 6, she released material attachment. In Part 7, she awakened the healer archetype. In Part 8, she loved solitude. In Part 9, she conversed with the universe. In Part 10, she laid the ego down. In Part 11, she loved with awakened presence. Then Part 12 is her ease within existence itself. No longer needing to become anything, no longer needing to prove anything, no longer needing to seek anything, simply to be being, presence, wholeness. And now, as you let your body settle, your breathing slow, your mind soften, remember that you too are on the journey back to yourself. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Tonight, you take one small step closer to that true self. If you wish to keep exploring the inner depths with us, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. What part of you is asking to be seen? Just a few words are enough. A sign of the journey you are on. Wishing you a night of deep sleep and a dawn of awakening with a lighter, clearer soul.